She rushed her only son into a Miami ICU, praying he would survive. But when she stepped inside the ward, she froze. Standing at the bedside of another patient was her millionaire ex, the man who broke her heart, the father her son never knew, holding the hand of his dying wife. Before I begin the story, I'd like to say a quick prayer for you, my dear family. May your days be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your steps guided by light. Amen. If you're happy to be here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. The air in Miami's Jackson Memorial ICU carried the faint, sterile scent of disinfectant, an unshakable mix of bleach, antiseptic, and human fragility. Fluorescent lights hummed above the waiting room, their glow too bright for the hour, as if mocking the exhausted faces that lined the rows of plastic chairs. Maya Alvarez clutched her son's hand tightly, her knuckles white with tension. At only 9 years old, Daniel's body seemed far too fragile for the tubes and monitors that surrounded him. His cheeks were pale, lips cracked from fever, and yet his small fingers still gripped hers with quiet strength. "Mom," he whispered, his voice raspy. "Am I going to get better?" Her throat tightened. She forced a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, baby. You're stronger than anyone I know. The doctors will help you, and I'll be right here. Always." She leaned down, pressing her lips against his damp forehead. Inside, fear churned. Pneumonia had spread faster than she could have imagined, dragging her only son into a whirlwind of tests for fluids and urgent transfers. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Her hair clung to her temples in unruly strands, and her once steady hands trembled each time the monitors beeped irregularly. A nurse entered, her shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. "We're moving him to ICU room 6, Ms. Alvarez. It's closer to the monitoring station. He'll have more eyes on him there." Maya nodded, heart racing. She kissed Daniel's forehead again before following as orderlies wheeled his bed down the sterile corridor. The hallway felt endless, every step echoing like footsteps in a cathedral. The air grew colder, the silence deeper. Room 6, she stepped inside, carrying Daniel's stuffed lion, a worn, golden-brown toy with a stitched smile he had slept with since birth. She placed it gently by his side. Her son's gaze softened as he reached for it weakly, then drifted into uneasy sleep. Maya exhaled shakily, lowering herself into the stiff chair beside his bed. She wanted nothing more than to hold him, but the wires and tubes created an invisible barrier. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering a prayer in Spanish under her breath. "Dios, por favor. Don't take him from me. Not him." The door creaked open behind her. She expected another nurse, maybe a doctor with updates. But when she turned, her heart stuttered, then crashed into chaos. There, framed in the doorway, stood John David, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed even in the middle of the night. He carried an aura of wealth and authority that seemed out of place in the cold sterility of an ICU ward. His dark hair was streaked with hints of silver, his jaw sharp, his presence commanding. Time had carved lines of power and fatigue into his face, but his eyes, those piercing storm-gray eyes, remained the same. Maya's breath caught. Her ex, the man she had once loved, the man she had walked away from a decade ago, the man who had never met his son. "Maya?" His deep voice cracked the silence like thunder. She froze, her hand still on Daniel's. Memory surged. The warmth of his hand in hers during college nights, the intoxicating way he whispered dreams into her ear, the painful moment she'd left when his ambition consumed everything, including her. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. John's gaze darted past her, landing on the sleeping boy. His brows furrowed, his lips parted as if to speak, but before he could, another voice cut through the tension. "John." A woman's voice, soft but strained. Maya turned sharply, and her stomach dropped further. Behind John, leaning on the doorway for balance, stood a frail woman in a hospital gown. Her skin was pale, her frame thin, her beauty diminished by illness, but not erased. She was clearly patient, clearly fighting her own battle, and clearly his wife. The world tilted. John placed a protective hand on the woman's back. "Emily, you shouldn't be walking. Come, let's get you back to your bed." His tone was tender, protective in a way Maya had once known too well. Emily's gaze followed Maya, then the small boy in the bed. Confusion flickered across her face, then faded into something unreadable. Maya's throat tightened. She rose slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. "Here with her? Here? In this ward?" John's eyes returned to her, sharp with disbelief. "Why are you here, Maya? Who is—" His gaze swept back to the boy. His jaw tightened. His lips pressed together as a storm of realization darkened his face. "Daniel," the boy mumbled weakly in his sleep, his small fingers twitching against the stuffed lion. John's chest rose sharply, as though the name itself had struck him. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Maya's heart raced, panic rising like a tide. She had spent 10 years protecting Daniel from this exact moment. 10 years shielding him from a father who had chosen ambition over family, who had built an empire while she raised their son alone. But fate, cruel, twisted fate, had dragged them into the same room, the same ward, at the same breaking point. The silence was unbearable. Finally, John's voice, low and raw, cut through. "Maya, is he—" His throat worked as if the words themselves were knives. "Is he mine?" Maya's vision blurred with tears. She clutched her son's hand, torn between truth and fear, between the past and the fragile present. Emily swayed beside John, her weak frame leaning heavily into his support. "John," she whispered faintly, her voice barely audible. "Let's go back." But John didn't move. His eyes locked onto Maya, burning with questions, regret, and something else, something deeper. Maya inhaled shakily, her heart pounding loud enough to drown out the monitors. "Yes," she whispered, the single word slicing through the sterile air. John's world shattered. John David stood frozen in the ICU room, as if his world had been split cleanly in two. The beeping monitors and low hum of machines faded into a distant echo. His focus, his entire being, was drawn to the boy sleeping in the narrow bed, to the truth that had just been spoken aloud. "Yes," Maya had said. One word, one devastating revelation. His son, his flesh and blood. For years, John had measured success in skyscrapers and profits, in magazine covers and boardroom victories. He had buried regrets under contracts, silenced doubts with champagne toasts, and drowned the echo of loneliness in late nights at his office. But now, standing in this sterile hospital room, everything he thought he knew about himself collapsed. He had a son, and he hadn't been there. Not for his first steps, not for his first words, not for anything. His hand instinctively reached out to steady himself against the wall, though his body betrayed no outward weakness. His reputation, his empire, had been built on composure. Yet inside, chaos raged. "John," Emily whispered again, tugging faintly at his sleeve. He turned, his jaw clenching. Emily's face was pale, her lips tinted with exhaustion. The illness that had brought her here was still shadowed across her features. He couldn't allow her to collapse. "Sit down," he said softly, guiding her toward a chair in the hallway just outside the room. Her body sagged with relief as she lowered herself down, and she closed her eyes, resting her head against the wall. Maya's gaze followed him, her arms now wrapped tightly around her own body as if bracing herself for the storm. "Why didn't you tell me?" John's voice was low, almost dangerous in its restraint. His eyes pinned her in place. Her lips trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Because you chose your world, John. You chose ambition, power, and money over me, over us. Do you think I wanted to raise a child in the shadows of your business deals, wondering when his father might finally notice he existed? Her words struck like daggers, each one drawing blood from wounds he had buried long ago. I didn't know, he said, his voice rough. God, Maya, I didn't know. You didn't ask. The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by the faint sound of Daniel's labored breathing. John turned his gaze back to the boy. Daniel, his son. The resemblance was undeniable now that he saw it. The shape of the jaw, the curve of the nose, even the stubborn crease in the boy's brow as he shifted in his sleep. A reflection of himself. Maya's voice softened, almost breaking. He's been sick for weeks, John. The doctors are worried. And I couldn't keep this from you anymore. Not when she swallowed hard, tears spilling over. Not when he might need more than me. John's chest constricted, a suffocating pressure he couldn't shake. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. His millions, his connections, his empire. None of it mattered in the face of a sick child who bore his blood. I want to help, he said firmly. I will help, whatever it takes. Maya's eyes flashed with both hope and skepticism. You think you can just walk in after 10 years and fix everything with your money? His jaw tightened. I don't know, but I can't walk away. Not now. Not from him. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of exhaustion etched into her frame. She turned back to Daniel, stroking his damp hair gently. He doesn't even know you exist. The words cut deeper than she could know. John wanted to kneel, to touch his son's hand, to say something, anything. But he froze, trapped between the life he had built and the life he had abandoned. Behind him, Emily stirred weakly in her chair. John. Her voice was frail, but it pulled him back into the present. Two worlds, two women. One child who had just changed everything. Later that night, Maya sat hunched beside Daniel's bed, her hand resting lightly on his as he slept. Her body ached, her mind weary. But sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, John's face loomed before her. The shock in his eyes when she admitted the truth, the anger, the regret. She pressed her palm to her forehead, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had managed for 9 years without him. She had endured poverty, late nights working double shifts, Daniel's endless questions about why he didn't have a father. She had survived. So why now did the mere sight of him unravel her resolve? Because part of her still remembered the boyish smile he once had, the way he whispered poetry in her ear, the nights they dreamed of building a future together before ambition swallowed him whole. She shook the thoughts away, chastising herself. That John David was gone. The man in the doorway tonight was a stranger wrapped in expensive suits and the weight of empire. And he was married. Her stomach twisted at the image of Emily, fragile, sick, leaning on him for strength. Whatever bitterness she felt, Maya could not deny the truth. Emily was his wife, and she was suffering. Maya closed her eyes. The only thing that mattered now was Daniel, her son, their son. John sat in a dimly lit hospital lounge, his tie loosened, his elbows resting heavily on his knees. The night pressed against the tall windows. Miami's neon glow, a distant reminder of the empire he usually commanded. Here, in the harsh white corridors of the ICU, power meant nothing. His mind reeled. A son, a boy of 9. All this time, Maya had carried that burden alone, and he had been oblivious. Worse, he hadn't cared enough to notice. He ran a hand down his face, his chest tight. Mr. David, a nurse approached quietly, clipboard in hand. Your wife is stable for tonight. She'll need another round of tests in the morning. He nodded absently, barely registering the words. His wife, his family, and yet his thoughts spun back to Daniel. The boy's frail body, his small hand clutching a lion. The unmistakable trace of his own features reflected in the child's face. The nurse's footsteps faded, leaving him alone with the storm in his chest. For the first time in his life, John David didn't know which world to fight for. The ICU at night was its own kind of battlefield. The steady beeping of heart monitors replaced gunfire. Whispered prayers stood in for battle cries, and weary parents served as soldiers on the front lines of hope and despair. Maya had long since lost count of the hours. The clock above the nurse's station ticked forward, but time here was elastic, stretching endlessly during moments of fear, collapsing into blinks during moments of relief. Daniel stirred in his bed, a fitful moan escaping his lips. The monitor beeped faster, sending a rush of panic through Maya. She stood instantly, gripping his hand. "Sure, baby." "Mommy's here," she whispered, smoothing his damp curls back from his forehead. His fever hadn't broken, and every shallow breath rattled through her chest like an earthquake. The door creaked open. "How is he?" John asked, his voice low. Maya shot him a wary glance. "Stable. For now." John stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Daniel. He looked at the boy the way one looks at a miracle, half disbelieving, half reverent. "I called in a specialist," he said quietly. "The best pediatric pulmonologist in the country. He'll be on a flight tonight." Maya stiffened. "I don't need your money to." "This isn't about money," John cut in, his voice firm but not harsh. "It's about saving him. If he's my son, then I will do everything in my power, everything to keep him alive." The word hung in the air like a spark. Maya's eyes glistened, but she turned away, stroking Daniel's hand instead. "You've missed 9 years. You don't get to just walk in and claim him now." John swallowed hard, stepping closer. His hand hovered above the boy's arm, then finally rested gently against his small wrist. The contact was electric, soft skin against callous palm. The bridge of years collapsing in a single heartbeat. Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open just enough to murmur, "Mom?" "I'm here, sweetheart," Maya soothed. But then Daniel's gaze drifted hazily toward John. His eyes, though cloudy with fever, lingered on the unfamiliar figure. "Who's that?" Maya froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. John's breath caught. He looked to Maya for permission, for some unspoken guidance. None came, so he bent slightly, his voice trembling as he whispered, "I'm a friend. I'm here to help." Daniel's eyelids drooped, and within moments he was asleep again. The question left the air heavy, unanswered, unfinished. Maya turned to John, her expression tight. "Do you see? He doesn't know you. He doesn't need confusion right now." John's jaw flexed. "Then when he's older and asks why his father was never there, you think that will hurt less?" The sting of truth silenced her. Emily stirred in her own hospital bed, the 4 drip beside her casting a rhythmic shadow across the wall. Her chest rose and fell with difficulty, each breath a battle. But her mind wasn't on her illness. It was on John. He had left her side hours ago under the guise of making a call. When he returned, his eyes had been distant, his thoughts elsewhere. Now, as she listened to the faint creak of ICU doors down the corridor, suspicion curled in her gut. Emily wasn't naive. She had built a life with John, and though love had bound them, she knew ambition often pulled his heart elsewhere. But this was different. His distraction wasn't business. It was something more primal, and she was determined to know what. The waiting room was deserted except for the hum of a vending machine. Maya sat on the edge of a plastic chair, exhaustion written across her face. John stood nearby, arms crossed, staring at the floor. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why are you really here, John? In this hospital? This ward of all places?" "My wife," he said simply, his tone clipped. "She's sick. It's serious." Maya blinked, surprised at the nakedness in his voice. For a moment, pity flickered through her before she quickly smothered it. "So you're married," she said, bitterness creeping in. "Figures. You always did move on quickly." His eyes snapped to hers, steel gray and cutting. "You think I forgot you? You think I walked away without scars?" She laughed dryly. "You didn't even look back, John." His voice dropped low and ragged. "Because if I had, I wouldn't have been able to leave." The confession cracked something in the air between them, a fracture through years of silence. Maya's lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, neither spoke. Their unspoken history stretched between them. Nights of laughter, dreams abandoned. A love that once burned too brightly. Then Maya looked away, her voice barely audible. "It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is Daniel." John nodded slowly, his chest tight. "Then let's fight for him, together." The rain returned to Miami that evening, hammering against the ICU windows in relentless waves. The city outside blurred into streaks of neon and water, a restless backdrop to the battles being fought inside the hospital walls. Maya hadn't left Daniel's side all day. She clutched his hand like a lifeline, her thumb tracing circles across his palm. His fever had spiked again, his tiny chest rising and falling with terrifying effort. Every beep of the monitor etched new cracks into her spirit. The door opened. John entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. One he placed on the small table beside her. The other he held as though it could anchor him. "You need to drink something," he said softly. "I don't need." "Yes, you do." His voice was firm, but gentler than before. "You've been here for hours without moving. If you collapse, he loses you, and he needs you more than anything." Maya hesitated, then reached for the cup. The warmth against her fingers reminded her of nights long ago. Late study sessions when John had brought her coffee just like this, insisting she couldn't conquer the world on empty energy. She pushed the memory aside and sipped. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rhythmic hiss of oxygen and the monitor's pulse. John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes stayed on Daniel, studying every rise and fall of his fragile chest. "He looks so much like you," he murmured. Then, after beat, "But his eyes, those are mine." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but there was no denying it. Daniel's eyes carried the same storm-gray depths as John's, the same intensity. It was the one thing she could never explain away. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make this harder than it already is." "I'm not trying to," John said. His hand twitched, as though he longed to reach for hers. "I'm just realizing how much I've missed." The rawness in his tone pierced her defenses. She stared at him, the years of bitterness warring with the undeniable truth, beneath the millionaire CEO exterior, beneath the suit and power. He was still the man who had once held her heart. But before she could answer, Daniel began to cough violently. The monitor shrieked. Maya leapt to her feet. "Doctor!" she screamed, panic flooding her veins. Nurses rushed in, adjusting wires, calling out vitals. A doctor followed, issuing rapid commands. John stood frozen for a moment, the world spinning around him, before instinct snapped him forward. He caught Maya's shoulders, grounding her as her knees threatened to buckle. "He's going to be okay," John said, though his own voice shook. "They'll take care of him. Just breathe, Maya. Breathe." She clung to him in that moment, her sob muffled against his chest. And though the machine screamed, though the storm outside raged, time seemed to pause. The two of them bound together again by fear, by love, by the fragile thread of the boy between them. Emily sat in her hospital bed, her body weak, but her mind restless. The nurse had mentioned John was in the ICU again, helping with child. The words had struck her like ice water. Why would John, her husband, be so invested in someone else's child? She tried to dismiss it. John was a compassionate man, sometimes to a fault. But the gnawing suspicion in her chest wouldn't fade. It grew sharper with every minute he spent away from her, with every whisper in the hallways she wasn't meant to hear. She swung her legs off the bed, wincing as pain rippled through her frail body. She steadied herself, gripping the four-pole as if it were a cane. Slowly, step by step, she made her way out of the room and down the corridor. The ICU doors loomed ahead. She pressed a hand against the glass and peered inside. What she saw made her breath catch. There was John holding Maya, his arms wrapped around her, their faces close, their bodies tethered not by accident but by history. And on the bed between them lay a boy, fragile, beautiful, with John's eyes. Emily's chest constricted, but not from her illness. The truth unfurled with brutal clarity. The boy wasn't just some patient. He was John's son. Emily waited until John stepped out of the ICU to grab something from the vending machine. She intercepted him halfway down the hall, her frail body trembling, but her eyes blazing with betrayal. "John," she rasped, her voice hoarse but sharp. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" John froze, the soda can in his hand forgotten. "Em?" Her voice broke, but the fury within it did not. "That boy, he's yours, isn't he?" John's silence was the only answer she needed. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "All these years, all the nights I thought we were partners, that we shared everything. And yet the most important truth, you kept it buried." "Emily, please," John said, his own voice fraying. "It wasn't like that. I didn't know. Maya never told me." Her bitter laugh echoed down the sterile corridor. "Oh, so it's your fault now? Convenient." He reached for her, but she recoiled. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her face pale with hurt. "I'm your wife, John. But looking at you now, I don't even know who you are." Her words cut deeper than any blade. For the first time in years, John David, the man who commanded boardrooms, who built empires, felt utterly powerless. The ICU quieted after Daniel's coughing fit. Machines hummed steadily once more, a fragile rhythm of borrowed peace. Maya sat by the bed, brushing sweat-soaked curls from her son's forehead, whispering soft lullabies he was too weak to hear. Her chest still trembled from the scare, but her hands never faltered. She had lived too long in single motherhood to afford weakness now. The door creaked open behind her. She turned, expecting a nurse. But it wasn't a nurse. Emily stood in the doorway. Her hospital gown hung loose on her thin frame, the four-pole trailing by beside her like a shadow. Her face was pale, but her eyes sharp, glinting with betrayal, pierced through the dim light. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. The storm outside cracked lightning across the window, illuminating the battlefield between them. "You," Emily whispered, her voice ragged. Maya stiffened. "You should be resting," she said, her voice taut, trying to maintain calm. But Emily stepped forward, dragging her four-pole, her breath shallow but her words sharp. "Don't tell me what I should be doing. Not when you've been hiding him here. Hiding this." She gestured toward Daniel, her hand trembling. Maya rose, placing herself instinctively between Emily and the bed. "Lower your voice. He's sleeping." "Don't you dare play protector," Emily spat, her composure cracking. "That boy, he's John's, isn't he? His blood, his eyes. I saw it. I saw everything." The words sliced through the room. Maya's heart slammed against her ribs. Her silence was all the confirmation Emily needed. Emily's laugh was bitter broken. "All these years I thought I knew my husband, and now I find out he left a child behind. A son. With you." Maya's hands clenched. "I never asked for his help. I never wanted him in Daniel's life. You think I came here to destroy your marriage? My son is sick. That's all that matters." Emily's eyes shimmered, rage and heartbreak warring within. Don't paint yourself noble. You had him in secret. And now you let fate throw us all into this hospital together. How poetic. Maya's composure fractured, her voice trembling with years of suppressed pain. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to raise Daniel alone, answering his questions about where his father was, why he didn't care? You don't know what it's like to watch your child grow and see his father's face in him every day, knowing that men walked away without looking back. The air between them vibrated with decades of pain. Two women tied to the same man, one by vows, the other by blood. The door swung open. John stood there, his face ashen, caught between two storms. His eyes darted from Emily's fury to Maya's wounded defiance, then to the boy sleeping in the bed, the silent epicenter of it all. Emily, he breathed. He shouldn't be here. Her gaze snapped to him, blazing. Don't you dare tell me where I should be. You've been lying to me by omission for years. I deserve answers. Maya folded her arms, her voice cutting through the room. Then ask him, Emily. Ask your husband why he left before he even knew what he was leaving behind. John flinched as though struck. Emily's chest heaved, her illness straining her frame, but her eyes locked on him like a hawk. Well, John, tell me, did you know? Did you know you had a son? John's throat worked, but no words came. The silence was deafening. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse, stripped of CEO authority. I didn't know. Not until today. I swear to you, Emily, I didn't know. Emily's face crumpled, but her fury held. And yet, you look at him like you've known all along, like he's been haunting you. John's gaze drifted back to the boy, his son, his blood, his redemption, and his curse. Because he feels familiar, he whispered. Like a part of me I didn't realize was missing. Maya's heart clenched. Emily's shattered. And the room, thick with truths finally laid bare, felt like it might collapse under the weight of all that had been left unsaid. The ICU monitors beeped in steady rhythm, but Maya's mother's instinct told her something was wrong. Daniel's breathing grew shallow, his chest rising and falling in quick, uneven bursts. His lips parted slightly, as if searching for more air than his lungs could hold. Daniel? Maya whispered, bending over him, her hand brushing his damp forehead. His skin felt clammy. Suddenly, the monitor alarm blared. His oxygen levels dipped, numbers plummeting. Help. Somebody please. Maya's cry broke through the tense air. Nurses rushed in, their movements sharp, controlled. One adjusted Daniel's mask, another checked the 4 lines, while a third wheeled in a crash cart, just in case. The air filled with the sound of medical urgency. Instructions fired like bullets, plastic wrappings ripped open, machines recalibrated. John stood frozen for half a second, his chest locked, until instinct propelled him forward. What's happening to him? He demanded, his voice cracking with fear he could no longer hide. Sir, you need to step back, one nurse ordered firmly. But he didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on his son, on the boy whose existence had just rewritten his life. Emily, frail but unrelenting, clung to the doorway. The 4 poles shook in her grip as she whispered, God, oh God. Her own heart monitor upstairs would have spiked if she were still wired in. Maya's voice cut through the chaos. Daniel, baby, I'm here. Hold on. Just hold on. The lead nurse adjusted the ventilator mask, oxygen hissing into Daniel's small lungs. Slowly, agonizingly, the numbers on the monitor crept upward. 86, 90, 95. The alarm silenced. Relief crashed over the room like a tidal wave. Maya sagged forward, clutching her son's hand, tears streaming silently. John pressed a fist to his lips, his whole body trembling with helplessness. Emily exhaled sharply, the sound more like a sob. Her body swayed, and for a moment it looked as if she would collapse. John rushed to her side, steadying her before she fell. You shouldn't be out of bed, he murmured, softer now, his anger stripped away. She shoved him weakly. Don't pretend you care about me right now, she whispered. Your son is in that bed. Not mine. Yours. The words pierced him deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever had. The nurses left after stabilizing Daniel, leaving only the family-shaped storm behind. Maya sat by the bedside, stroking Daniel's arm as if her touch alone could anchor him to life. John lingered near the window, his reflection fractured in the glass, watching both women with an expression that belonged to no CEO, no mogul. Just a man cornered by his past. Emily sat slumped in a chair, silent tears streaking her cheeks. She didn't look at John, and he didn't dare meet her gaze. Maya finally broke the silence. Her voice was quiet but firm, like steel wrapped in silk. This is what I've lived with for 9 years, John. Nights when I didn't know if he'd make it till morning. ER visits where I begged doctors to do their best, while praying the bills wouldn't drown us. You think this is new? This is my normal. Her words carved deep into him. John stepped forward, but carefully, as if approaching sacred ground. His voice trembled. Why didn't you tell me? Maya's laugh was bitter. Because when you left, you made it clear where your priorities were. You had dreams of skyscrapers, empires, Forbes covers. I wasn't going to beg you to be a father when you couldn't even stay to be a man. The memory of that night resurfaced unbidden. The argument, the slammed door, the look in her eyes when he walked away. At the time, he'd convinced himself it was necessary, that ambition demanded sacrifice. He hadn't known that sacrifice had a heartbeat. Emily finally spoke, her voice hoarse. So what now, John? You've built your empire, but you've also built 2 broken families in its shadow. Her words left him speechless. He looked from her to Maya, then to Daniel, his son's fragile frame caught between them. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix this. Maya's eyes softened just a fraction. Start by not running this time. The room fell silent again. The only sound, Daniel's steady breathing, fragile, but fighting. For the first time in years, John David didn't feel like a CEO or a success story. He felt like a man at the edge of a cliff, forced to choose not between deals or empires, but between truth and cowardice, between love and fear. And this time, the stakes weren't financial. They were flesh and blood. The ICU lights dimmed into their nighttime setting, soft amber glows replacing the harsh fluorescence. Machines hummed in steady rhythm, like a lullaby of wires and steel. Daniel lay still, his chest rising and falling under the hiss of oxygen. Maya sat in the hard plastic chair by his bed, her body stiff but her gaze unwavering. She hadn't moved for hours, except to brush back his curls when they clung to his damp forehead. Her world narrowed to that bed, that child, those shallow breaths. Across the room, John remained by the window, his tie loosened, his jacket discarded on a nearby chair. The man who once commanded entire boardrooms now looked strangely small, his shoulders heavy, his gaze unfocused. And then there was Emily. She sat in the corner, wrapped in her hospital gown, her fur pole like a ghost tethering her to life. She stared at Daniel, not with affection but with something far more complex, a mix of jealousy, sorrow, and betrayal. Maya finally broke the silence, her voice low. You don't have to stay here, John. But his response was immediate, firm. I do. She turned her head, her eyes narrowing. Why? Out of guilt? His gaze finally shifted to hers, and for once, he didn't hide behind authority or arrogance. Because he's my son. Because I walked away once and I won't do it again. The words caught in Maya's chest, stirring something dangerous. Hope. She quickly smothered it. Don't make promises to him you can't keep. I'm not promising, John said softly now. I'm choosing. The air thickened. Emily's sharp inhale broke it. Choosing, she whispered, her voice trembling. "So that's it then. You're choosing them over me." John turned to her, his face pained. "Emily?" "No," she cut in, her voice rising despite the weakness in her body. "Don't you dare pity me. I stood by you when you clawed your way to the top. I believed in your vision. I gave you my life, John, and now I sit here in a hospital bed, dying slowly, while you find salvation in the child you never claimed." Her words sliced through the room like glass. Maya lowered her eyes, unwilling to witness the fracture of another woman's marriage even as her own wounds throbbed open. John stepped closer to Emily, kneeling so he could meet her tear-stained face. "You are my wife. That hasn't changed. But this," he glanced at Daniel, sleeping between them, "this is my blood, my responsibility, my chance to be the man I should have been." Emily's tears turned to bitter laughter. "And what about me? What about your responsibility to me? Am I just collateral damage in your redemption story?" The question hung in the air, raw and unanswerable. Maya rose from her chair, tension radiating from her frame. "Enough. This isn't about us. Not right now. This is about Daniel. He doesn't care about marriage vows or mistakes from years ago. He just wants to live. He just wants his mother by his side. That's all he's ever needed." But as she spoke, her voice wavered, because for the first time, she wasn't sure that was true anymore. For the first time, she wondered if Daniel might also need the father whose presence already seemed to anchor him, even in sleep. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Emily was eventually escorted back to her room, her protests weak, but her glare lingering on John until the door closed behind her. Silence settled again. John moved to the chair beside Daniel's bed. For a long moment, he just stared at the boy's hand, small and pale against a blanket. Then, almost reverently, he reached out and rested his large hand gently over it. The contact was electric, subtle, but undeniable. His chest tightened, a swell of emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. "He has your strength," John murmured, breaking the quiet. Maya turned, startled. "What?" John's eyes stayed on his son. "Even when his body is weak, you can see it. He's a fighter. That's you in him." Maya's throat tightened. "Don't romanticize what you've never lived through." He looked up at her then, his eyes raw. "Teach me then." The plea startled her. She wanted to scoff, to tell him it was too late. But the sincerity in his voice struck her harder than she expected. She swallowed, her defenses wavering. "You think it's that simple," she whispered, "that you can just step in after 9 years and learn to be a father?" John shook his head. "No, I know it won't be simple, but I can't stand here and do nothing. Not anymore." Maya's gaze lingered on him, searching for cracks, for dishonesty. But all she saw was a man stripped of armor, a man wrestling with regret. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if he really meant it? She looked at Daniel, fragile and sleeping, and a whisper of hope escaped her before she could stop it. "Then don't run, John. Not this time." His hand tightened around his son's, a silent vow forming in the dim hospital light. Daniel stirred before dawn, a soft whimper breaking the fragile quiet of the ICU. The machines hummed steadily, their green lines painting shadows across the walls. Maya's head jerked up from where she had dozed in the chair, her neck stiff from hours of holding vigil. She leaned in, whispering, "Baby, I'm here." Daniel blinked, his lashes fluttering against pale cheeks. His voice was hoarse when it came. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart," she said quickly, kissing his forehead, relief spilling through her like warm light. "You're safe. You're okay." But then Daniel's gaze drifted sideways, catching the tall figure seated in the chair opposite. John. His dark eyes were fixed on the boy, raw emotion etched into every line of his face. His large hand still gently cradled Daniel's, as if letting go would unravel him. Daniel squinted, his small voice trembling with curiosity. Who's that? Maya froze, her breath caught in her throat. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her imagination, always pushing it further into the future. But the future had arrived. John leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "I'm John," he said, his lips parted, hesitating. Then he chose the truth. "I'm your father." The word fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread wide. Daniel blinked again. Confusion etched across his face. "Father?" Maya's heart squeezed painfully. She opened her mouth to soften it, but John spoke first. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling, stripped of all corporate polish. "I didn't know not until now, but I should have. And I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Daniel's thin fingers twitched beneath his. "So you're real?" John's breath hitched. "Real?" Daniel's eyes watered, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "Mom used to say my dad was far away, that maybe he'd come back one day. I thought maybe she made him up, to make me feel better." Maya's lips quivered, her hand covering her mouth. John swallowed hard, his chest aching. "I'm not made up, son. I'm here, and I want to stay." The word son seemed to sink into Daniel slowly, like sunlight through clouds. His lips trembled, but for the first time in years, a faint smile curved at the corners. "Will you come to my baseball game?" he whispered. "If I get better?" The innocence of the question broke John completely. His eyes burned, his hand tightening around Daniel's small one. "Every game. Every single one." Maya turned her face away, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. It was what Daniel had needed all along, what she had feared to hope for. Down the hall, Emily sat awake in her own room, staring at the sterile ceiling tiles. She had overheard pieces of the conversation when the nurses wheeled past, snippets carried like daggers through the thin walls. "I'm your father. I want to stay." Each word replayed in her mind like a cruel echo. She clutched her blanket, her body trembling. The sickness eating at her was nothing compared to this new sickness of the soul. The knowledge that she was no longer the center of her husband's gravity. Tears burned her eyes. For years, she had been the constant, the anchor, the one who believed in his dreams when no one else did. And now, as her body weakened and her time thinned, she saw it clearly. She was being replaced. By a child, by the woman who bore him, by fate itself. She turned her face into the pillow, muffling the sobs. But deep inside, a spark lit, not just sorrow, but something sharper. Determination. If John thought he could simply divide his life between them, she would remind him that love demanded choosing. And she wasn't about to surrender, not yet. Back in the ICU, Daniel had drifted back to sleep, but John still sat by the bed, holding his son's hand. Maya moved to stand beside him, her voice breaking the silence. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered. John looked up, startled. "Said what?" "That you're staying. That you'll be there for every game." He's fragile. He clings to every word. If you break that promise, it'll break him. John's jaw tightened. "Then I won't break it." Maya shook her head, bitterness creeping in. "You don't know what it costs to stay, to show up, to put him before everything." John's eyes met hers, fierce. "Then teach me." She faltered, taken aback by his raw sincerity. His eyes held none of the arrogance of the man she once knew, only desperation and determination. For a moment, she almost believed him. Almost. She glanced back at Daniel, brushing his curls from his forehead. "He's all I have, John. If you hurt him, there won't be anything left of me." John's hand lingered on his son's, steady as a vow. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't." The hospital hallways were restless that night, shadows spilling from half-lit corridors, footsteps echoing like whispers of decisions yet to be made. John stood at the vending machine, staring blankly at rows of snacks, he had no appetite for. His tie hung loose. His shirt creased from a sleepless night. He reached for the coffee button, but never pressed it, his hand stilled by a voice behind him. "John." He turned. Emily stood there, pale against the sterile light, for Paul beside her like a sentinel. She had convinced the nurse to let her walk, and though her steps were shaky, her eyes burned with an intensity that eclipsed her frailty. "He shouldn't be out of bed," he said softly, concern flickering. Her lips curved into a brittle smile. "And you shouldn't be in theirs." The words landed heavy. Emily moved closer, her hand gripping the four-pole for strength. "I heard you, in that room, telling him you're his father, telling Maya you'll stay. Do you have any idea what that does to me?" John's jaw tightened. "Emily?" "No," she cut him off, her voice trembling with equal parts anger and heartbreak. "Don't placate me. Don't treat me like I'm fragile glass. I've been your wife for over a decade. I stood beside you when you had nothing but ambition and a fire in your chest. I defended you to investors who called you reckless. I sat alone through board meetings, charity galas, and endless nights of silence because I believed in you. And now when my body is failing me, when I need you most, you give yourself to them." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment the steel in her voice cracked. "Tell me, John, do you still love me? Or is this the end?" The question hung in the sterile air like a blade. John's throat worked, but no words came immediately. His silence was its own kind of answer. Emily's breath shuddered. She straightened, summoning the last of her strength. "Then you choose tonight, me or them. There isn't room for both." Before he could respond, alarms blared down the hall. A nurse sprinted past them. "ICU room 314. John's heart seized. "Daniel?" He didn't wait for Emily's reaction. He ran, his shoes slamming against the tile, his pulse roaring louder than the alarms. Emily followed as best she could, her gown fluttering behind her like a ghost. Inside the ICU, chaos reigned. Nurses swarmed around Daniel's bed, machines shrieking warnings. Maya was at his side, panic in her eyes, whispering desperately to her son. "Stay with me, Daniel. Stay with me, baby." John burst in. "What's happening?" "Respiratory distress," a nurse snapped, adjusting the oxygen. "We're losing him." Maya's tears streamed unchecked. She clutched Daniel's hand, her whole body shaking. No, please, not like this." John moved beside her instinctively, his hand joining hers over Daniel's. For the first time, their grief was united, not divided. "Fight, son," John whispered hoarsely, bending close. "You're stronger than this. You're my boy. You don't give up." Emily appeared in the doorway, frozen as she watched the man she loved lean over another woman's child, his child. The minutes dragged like years, the room filled with sterile commands and beeping machines. Then just as suddenly as it began, the monitors steadied. Daniel's chest rose with a shaky but steady breath. The nurse exhaled. "He's stabilizing. We've got him." Maya collapsed against the bed, sobbing with relief. John gripped her shoulder, grounding her, his own tears falling freely. Emily turned away, her hand pressed to her mouth, her world unraveling silently in that doorway. Later, when the room quieted and Daniel slept again, Maya whispered without looking at John. He almost slipped away. "And her voice cracked. "I can't do this alone anymore." John's hand lingered on hers. "You won't. Not ever again." Emily, standing unseen just outside, closed her eyes. The choice had already been made, but in her chest, sorrow twisted into something sharper. If she was to lose her husband, she would not lose quietly. The ICU grew quiet in the days that followed, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after holding their breath too long. Daniel's condition stabilized, his breathing stronger, his cheeks slowly regaining color. Nurses moved with less urgency, their smiles softer now, when they checked the monitors. Maya lived in that fragile space between exhaustion and relief, her heart anchored to the steady rise and fall of her son's chest. She slept in stolen fragments, her hand always clutching Daniel's. And John never left. He sat through every hour, through every beep and every sigh, watching his son with the intensity of a man who had finally discovered the meaning of everything he once thought he wanted. The boardrooms, the deals, the headlines, they were nothing compared to this small boy fighting for life. Emily lingered too, but at a distance. She watched them through the glass panels of the ICU, her hands clasped, her body weaker by the day. The world had shifted beneath her, and she was no longer at its center. One evening, Maya stepped out for a moment of air, leaving John alone with Daniel. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Dad." His voice was soft, uncertain. John's heart leapt at the word. He leaned closer. "Yes, son?" Daniel licked his lips, his voice barely a whisper. "You didn't leave." John's throat tightened. He cupped his son's small hand in both of his. "I won't. Not ever again." A faint smile crossed Daniel's face before he drifted back to sleep. John sat there, tears blurring his vision, the weight of years of mistakes pressing down, and for the first time, lifting too. When Maya returned, she found him still holding Daniel's hand. She studied him in silence, then spoke quietly. "You really mean it this time?" John looked up at her, his eyes raw but certain. "I do. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. For him. For you." Maya's lips trembled. She wanted to believe, and deep down she already did. Emily confronted John later that night in the hospital's quiet courtyard. She wore a shawl over her gown, her skin pale, her frame thinner than ever. "You've made your choice," she said without preamble. John sighed, guilt and sorrow etched into his face. "Emily?" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm though her hands trembled. "Don't say you still love me. Don't tell me we can go back. I see it in your eyes, John. The way you look at him. The way you look at her. I've lost you." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice softened. "I can't fight a child. I won't. He deserves you more than I do now." John's chest ached. "You were everything to me." "I know." She gave a faint, broken smile. "But everything changes. I just never thought I'd have to watch it happen while dying by inches." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently. "Go. Be the man they need. Don't waste what little time I have left by pretending." For the first time in weeks, she spoke without anger, only weary acceptance. And John, for all his strength, wept. Weeks later, Daniel was discharged, his small body stronger, his spirit unbroken. Maya wheeled him out of the hospital into the Miami sun, the air warm and salty with the ocean nearby. John walked beside them, pushing the bags, his suit exchanged for a simple shirt and jeans. He looked less like a CEO and more like a father. Emily remained behind. Her treatments continued, but her fight was not against death anymore. It was against bitterness. And in that fight, she found peace. Before they left, she whispered to John, "Take care of him. Take care of her. And when you think of me, don't remember the anger. Remember the woman who once believed you could change the world." He kissed her forehead, tears wetting his lashes. "I will." As Maya buckled Daniel into the car, the boy looked up at his father. "Are we really going home together?" John smiled, a genuine unguarded smile. "Yeah, son, together." Maya closed the car door, her eyes meeting John's over the roof. For the first time in nearly a decade, she didn't see the man who had abandoned her. She saw the man who had finally come home. And in that quiet moment, beneath the Miami sun, forgiveness took root, not as a sudden miracle, but as a seed. The road ahead would not be easy, but it would be theirs, together.